Hello everyone, welcome to Microeconomics. Today's topic will be monopolistic competition and oligopoly along with game theory analysis. Let's get started. The first market that we're going to analyze is the theory of monopolistic competition. And the theory of monopolistic competition let us know that there's a specific market structure that consists of the following scenarios. There's many sellers and many buyers in a monopolistic competitor structure. The firms produce and sell differentiated products that are differentiated by different type of mechanisms such as brand, the quality of the product, and other important features. In monopolistic competition, there is easy entry and exit out of the industry, and any firms can enter with no barriers to entry. The firms tend to earn normal profits in the long run, and they reach what is called a zero profit equilibrium, which means that all of the profits are fully exploited and they are normalized. The name monopolistic competition sounds like a monopoly, but is not the same thing. Monopolistic firms behave differently than a monopoly, but they share similar categories and they share a similar model structure, but the characteristics are slightly or highly different to some extent. Let's take a look. Monopolistic competitors engage also in what is called non-price competition, anything that has to do with advertising, branding, or other important techniques in the market. And the monopolistic competitors are highly competitive with one another. Since there's many sellers, there's going to be many firms competing with each other. So that's a slight distinction between monopoly, because a monopoly is just one single firm. Monopolistic competitors, there's many of them competing with each other, but they have the ability to influence the market like a monopoly would. Now, when we're looking at monopolistic competitors, the price and the marginal revenue for a monopolistic competitor are set in a specific manner in order to maximize profits. The monopolistic competitor also faces a downward sloping demand curve, and this downward sloping demand curve allows them to set or have some form of control in their price. The price itself, the firm itself is considered to be a price searcher, a price maker, or a price setter, because it's attempting to, at the same time, maximize profit or generate normal profits, but it has similar categories like a monopoly, that in this case is a price searcher or it's a price maker and has the ability to influence the price of the good. So when we're looking at the monopolistic competitor, the price for this firm is going to be greater than the marginal revenue. The price the monopolistic competitor sets is going to be greater than the marginal revenue for its unit. And if you recall, this is very similar to a monopoly scenario. Again, don't confuse these two monopolistic firms with a monopoly because the names sound very similar, but they're slightly different. They have similar features, like in this case, a price searcher or a price greater than marginal revenue, but they combine elements of other structures. A monopolistic competitive firm, or in this case, a producer, is going to produce a quantity of output where the marginal revenue of the good or service is equivalent to the marginal cost. This particular profit maximizing output rule is very consistent through all of the market structures. Where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, the firm produces a profit maximizing quantity of output. And if we look at figure 1, the figure 1 is going to look, the graphical illustration is going to show the graphical illustration of a monopolistically competitive firm. If you notice, we have a downward sloping demand curve, a downward sloping marginal revenue curve, an average total cost curve, ATC, dark blue, and a marginal cost curve, MC. And the model is very similar to a monopoly model. However, in this case, we're looking at a monopolistic competitor firm, a monopolistic firm. It is still going to operate where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So this yellow curve that is downward sloping is a downward sloping line. Marginal revenue, where it crosses or where it's equal to the marginal cost curve, right at this point, it looks like an X with a slight hook. the firm is going to produce a quantity for the monopolistic competitor, and since it has the ability to influence the price on the demand for the good, on the consumer demand, the monopolistic firm is going to set a price monopolistic competitor, price of 1. If the price is greater than the average total cost, which is the blue curve, greater than the average total cost for the quantity of output, the price in the market minus the average cost per unit, it will yield the profits per unit, or the total profit for the profit maximizing quantity. One of the characteristics of monopolistic competitors is that it has the ability to generate profits, and it also has the ability to break even or incur losses. So if you recall here, this model looks very similar to a monopoly model, but it's not a monopoly, it's a monopolistic competitor. Again, please make sure that distinction is clear, because the monopolistic firm can make profits, and the model will look very similar to a monopoly, but it can also incur potential losses, or in some cases break even in the long run. Now, the theory of monopolistic competition is going to specify that in the long run, the profits are going to be reduced due to the entry and exit of firms competing with each other in the industry. They're going to lower the demand for each other, or there's going to be more firms competing with one another, and the demand for the ongoing existing firms is going to be affected by the other firms entering the market, because there are no barriers to entry, and the profits begin to be now shared with everyone. The profits are going to be shared profits. So this competition is going to reduce the economic profits for all of the firms. If there's free entry and exit, then there's a highly competitive market structure that allows the firms to share the profits in the industry. Some firms may attempt to compete and make more profits, etc., but the profits are split among the firms. And this is possible that in the long run, the firms can earn what is called a normal profit. Normal profit means that the firm is able to cover all of their expenses in operation, all of the necessary items, and also it generates what is called zero profit equilibrium, which means the firm may break even in the long run. Think of the long run as a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or more. The short run is within a month, the first production quarter, 2 quarters of production, 3 quarters, and as you get longer in time, you have a year, 2, 3 years, and so on, depending on how we're analyzing the long run. Now, let's take a look at the automobile industry with Henry Ford as one of the revolutionaries that introduced the assembly line in the production process of cars. Henry Ford is known for his strategy of producing the standard Model T, which is the first, one of the first American automobiles factories that revolutionized the market. And when we're looking at Henry Ford, he had major competitors like Alfred P. Sloan from GM, General Motors, and that started to challenge Henry Ford's simple strategy of offering just one standard car. And Alfred P. Sloan actually introduced GM later on with different products, with different quality, with different prices, and essentially developed Chevrolet, Cadillac, Buick, and other brands that started to compete with Ford. And it made the market more competitive now with several producers competing with each other. So if Henry Ford was making a lot of profits with his regular T model, now GM was introducing a different type of market, different type of cars to the consumers, and the profits started to be shared among the firms, in this case, that were competing with each other heavily. So if we look at our model in the long run, exhibit number 2 shows the monopolistic competitor with ongoing competition of entry into the industry. Think about all of the automobile industry firms that entered later on. We have Ford, GM, all of the other providers like Toyota, for example, or other major firms like Honda, etc. If there's entry into the market, in the industry, the demand for the existing firms may lower, and because consumers are going to demand more of the other differentiated products, and this is going to create a situation where the demand for the goods and services is going to be tangent to the average total cost. The price in the market is still going to be determined by the firm at the profit maximizing quantity, and this is always where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. The firm produces a profit maximizing quantity and sets a profit maximizing price, which in this case, the profit maximizing price is going to be equivalent to the average total cost in the long run. In the long run, this is the model of monopolistic firms that break even and make no profits or no substantial profits, and are currently breaking even and are not experiencing losses. This is a long-run equilibrium model of a monopolistic competitor, where the demand curve may actually decline or increase, and that determines the profit margins that a firm can obtain. Now, within a monopolistic firm, we're able to see that the firm can experience excess capacity production abilities, which is referred to as the excess capacity theorem. The excess capacity theorem specifies that a monopolistic competitor in equilibrium, it produces limited output, smaller quantity of output than it normally would on the production process if they continue to producing, where average total cost will be the least possible. With excess capacity theorem, we see that the monopolistic firms are able to produce smaller quantities of output, limited output, to have an influence on the price, even though the average cost of production is still declining. Average cost is declining, but they produce limited output to set a price. This is referred to as the excess capacity factor, or the excess capacity theorem capability, that the firm can produce more output at a lower cost, but it doesn't. It produces limited output. Let's take a look at the model. This is what I refer to. The average total cost is downward sloping, is declining, and if you notice, after point A, average total cost is still declining, and it intersects marginal costs right here at the lowest level. This lowest level point is the lowest point of the average total cost curve, and if you go right below to the quantity, it indicates that you can produce a little bit more output at a lower cost per on average, and potentially charge a lower price and more quantity of output. But the theory of profit maximizing marginal revenue and marginal cost specifies that the firm should produce a smaller quantity. The difference between those 2 points is what's referred to as the excess capacity factor. The difference between those 2 points, between what is produced and what the firm can produce at a lower cost. The excess capacity can be actually explained with this graphical illustration model. So let's take a look at the issue of excess capacity in comparison to the previous model, and also with perfect competition framework. So our average total cost here is U-shaped, downward sloping, and then it increases after point L. So we have our downward sloping demand curve for the consumer. We have a downward sloping marginal revenue curve, and where marginal revenue curve intersects marginal costs, where marginal revenue intersects marginal cost, or where marginal cost intersects marginal revenue, and vice versa, the firm produces a quantity monopolistic competitor, QM. This is the quantity. QMC1 is the quantity that the monopolistic firm produces, and it has control over this quantity. It will produce where MR equals to MC, or where MC is equal to MR, vice versa. It's an identity. Here, it will produce this limited output, QMC1, let's say 100 units. And it will set a price equivalent to the demand curve here at point A and charge a price PMC1. However, the theory of excess capacity theorem is specifying that the firm is still experiencing lower average costs. There's lower costs that are declining at point L, typically where marginal cost intersects average total cost at its lowest point, that is indicating the lowest point of the curve, the lowest cost of production. At point L, this is the lowest average total cost on average for a greater quantity, QMC2, like 200 units. So suppose this is QMC2, quantity monopolistic competitor 200 units. And the firm can charge potentially a lower price PMC, a lower price for more units. The difference between the excess capacity capability at a lower cost minus the limited quantity of output is referred to as the excess capacity factor between those 2 points, meaning that the firm has the ability to produce extra units at a lower cost on average, but is limited by the marginal revenue, marginal cost, profit maximizing rule to produce a smaller quantity given its average cost of operations. This is an important factor because often cases the firms may choose to produce less output and control the price in order to have some pricing power and some form of control of the market or of its goods. If we compare this to a perfectly competitive firm, this is more towards an advanced analysis. The price under perfect competition, it's horizontal in this case. It's always given. The price will always be the same for a good or service. And it's equivalent to the demand for the good. And it's also equivalent to the marginal revenue curve. So the price under monopolistic, under competitive markets, this model to the right, model B, is the model of a perfectly competitive firm. When we compare these two models, this is important for the exam, you will notice that the graphical illustration is different on in two accounts. The marginal revenue curve, it's different. The demand curve, it's different. And the two things that are maybe similar is the marginal cost. Marginal costs for both are there. And the average total cost, both of them are U-shaped. In perfect competition, the price is equivalent to marginal revenue. It's equivalent to the marginal cost per unit at the lowest point of the curve here at point L. And it's also equivalent to the demand for the good or service. It's a triple identity condition. Price in competitive markets is equivalent to the demand for the good because the consumers demand X amount of units at that standard price. And the marginal revenue per unit is always the same for all of the units. So the firm will produce where marginal revenue, again, marginal revenue, or a horizontal line, crosses or intersects marginal cost at point L. At that point, it's just specifically equivalent. So they produce a greater quantity competitive markets. Notice that this quantity is actually greater. The distance from here to QMC1 is greater from 0 to QMC1. It's greater than the quantity that a monopolistic firm produces. Essentially, what this model is letting us know are three main things. The quantity produced in perfect competition is often greater than a monopolistically competitive firm's quantity because they limited the quantity. The price under competitive markets, it's lower and it's equivalent to the marginal cost per unit at point L at the lowest point, or equivalent to the marginal revenue per unit. And the other thing is that the firms in this case have the ability to enter and exit. The model for monopolistic competitors lets us know a little bit different story. The quantity is restricted, quantity is smaller. They have a price making ability, price searcher. They can control the price and quantity. And they have the excess capacity capability to produce more at a lower cost. So slightly different, similar approach, depending on how we analyze the model. So when we're looking at monopolistic competitors, they are very prevalent in the market. They exist and compete with one another essentially in the market, and they have what is called efficiency factors. Allocative efficiency is where the firm produces a particular output where the price of the good or service is equivalent to the marginal cost. That will be very similar to perfect competition. Allocative efficiency for a monopolistic competitor means that the firm chooses to operate where the price is equivalent to the marginal cost of production. When we're looking at this scenario, a monopolistically competitive firm still would charge a slightly higher price, greater than marginal costs, and is not operating technically, rarely ever, at allocative efficiency. If it does, then the price is actually lower. The price will have to be lower. So if we were to apply the allocative efficiency factor, it means that the price that the firm sets should be equivalent to the marginal cost per unit, which is really relatively lower. So the firm, a monopolistically competitor, typically sets a profit maximizing price, limits the quantity of output produced, the price is greater than the marginal cost, and it doesn't operate at allocated efficiency. Allocated efficiency is mainly typically towards perfectly competitive firms. And in some cases, they tend to produce in productive efficiency. The firm sets a price where the price in the market is equivalent to the potential average total cost. It's potentially operating at that point where the average total cost curve is tangent to the demand curve and sets the price there. It could produce there, but true productive efficiency, a true productive efficiency, is when the firm sets the price that is equivalent to the lowest average total cost of production at the very low level and produce more output. Productive efficiency. It attempts to do so by, in the long run, by producing a good or service and charge the price where average total cost is equivalent to the demand curve and equivalent to the price. But the true production efficiency means that the firm charges a price that is equivalent to the lowest average total cost of production. In theory, this is a theory application. It's possible, but most of the time, most of the firms are always going to charge a price that is greater than the average total cost and that is greater than the marginal cost per unit in real-time applications in real life. Allocated efficiency and productive efficiency is the ideal condition that could exist. A different market that it's slightly different than monopoly, slightly different than perfect competition, and slightly different than monopolistic firms is oligopoly. Oligopoly, it's one of the four market structures. So far we have perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic firms, and this one is oligopoly. Let's take a look at oligopoly. Notice that the names are very similar, monopoly, monopolistic firms, oligopoly. The only one that's different is perfect competition. Because the characteristics, if you hear the same type of name, is because the characteristics may be similar, but the actual firms and how they behave are slightly different. So let's take a look. What is an oligopoly and how does it behave and what does it mean? Oligopoly is a market structure that is considered by the following characteristics. It has few sellers and many buyers. Actually, every industry has many buyers because the consumers are a great numbers, millions of consumers. But in oligopoly, we have few sellers, limited sellers. The sellers are very specific and they could influence and control the market. The firms produce products that are actually different and are highly differentiated. In this case, the products could be different, or in some cases, in rare situations, they are considered similar, homogeneous in this case. So they could be different, they could be highly differentiated, homogeneous, similar products, and we're going to use the similarity factor as to how that affects two firms that produce the similar good in the market. And they also incorporate what is called potential barriers to entry. And notice that this is one of the characteristics of a monopoly, barriers to entry. So oligopoly combines elements of some of the other markets. The name itself sounds very similar because it arises from the same forces that lead towards monopoly creation, but it's not a monopoly. Again, make sure to differentiate the names. This is oligopoly. The firms that operate, if there are few of them, let's say a handful of firms or two firms, are highly interdependent. Interdependent means that their actions affect one another, or they have some form of relation in the industry. And the simplest form of an oligopoly is a duopoly, two firms. And when you have two firms, you can be highly interdependent. It means that the firms are competing directly in the market and their products are interdependent and their actions are interdependent of each other. For example, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, two firms. We have a duopoly. Two firms control the beverage industry, carbonated drinks, Pepsi and Coca-Cola, Powerade and Gatorade. They're owned by Coca-Cola and Pepsi, along with Dasani and Aquafina. So two of the firms control most of the market. at least in the United States. They have maintained similar percentages or close to about the same, but in this case, Coca-Cola controls 44% in the US and Pepsi 32%. So roughly 76% of the market is controlled by these two firms, with the other remaining share by the other companies. So this is considered a duopoly when they control most of the market. The main question is, how do we know when the industry is a duopoly? How do we know if the industry is monopoly? How do we know if the firms is competitor markets? Because we know the models could be different or could be similar. For those questions, we need to analyze the concentration ratio and the Hirschman-Herfindahl index. The concentration ratio, in this case, is a little bit specific. The percentage of an industry and the sales of that industry, or the assets and the output, are accounted by a specific number of producers in that industry. If the industry is highly concentrated by few firms, then there's high concentration by a specific number of firms. If the industry is less concentrated, then you're going to have more firms competing with each other. So if you in the previous example with Coca-Cola and Pepsi, in percentage terms, two firms control 76% of the market. So you have a highly concentrated industry where two firms, by X number, two firms control most of the industry. And the concentration ratio is often referred to as analyzing the four main companies that control the industry and what is their respective market shares. So let's take a look. A high concentration ratio implies that a few sellers make up the industry. And this is a great example, for example, the cell phone industry. When it comes to AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and it used to be Sprint, but now it's merged with T-Mobile, and then the other small providers. So you have a high concentration that involves few sellers. There were 5, now there's only like 3 or 4 for the most part. And low concentration ratio implies that there's many more firms. There are a lot of firms with small market shares, and everybody's competing with each other. So there's less concentration of firms. There's like 10 providers, 15 providers, 20 providers. The consumer has a lot of options. We can also analyze this with what is called the HHI-Index, the Hirschman-Herfindahl Index. The HHI-Index, for short, it measures in one way concentration in the industry and how the industry is composed. The HHI, the Hirschman Index, can be calculated using the percentage of the market share. We square that market share, and then we drop the percentage, plus the market share of the second firm, plus the market share of the third firm, plus any number of firms. We add them together and square their market share percentage, or their whole number in this case, to get a specific value. So if the HHI, for simplicity, you can just use the whole numbers. You can just square the market share in whole numbers. Market share of firm 1, 20%. Market share of firm 2, 30%. Market share of firm 3, 20%. Market share of the last firm, another 30%. So then you get a specific number of value. If the HHI is between 1 and 1,000, the industry is highly competitive, a perfectly competitive market where there's a lot of firms competing with each other. If the HHI is between 1,000 to 2,500 in whole numbers, the industry is somewhat competitive. There's less competition. It indicates the closer you are to 2,500, it indicates oligopoly structure. It indicates oligopoly. So if the HHI it's greater than 2,500, or if you're already in the 2,000 range, it indicates that the industry is potentially oligopolized. Again, if you're already closer to the higher range, the closer you are to the ranges, you're already approaching the next stage. So here, if you're at the 2,000 range or 2,500 or more, it indicates oligopoly. So there's less competition and more towards few firms. And then if it's greater than 2,500 to like 5,000 or more, it starts getting really concentrated to like monopoly structure, where maybe one firm has the majority control of the market. So when we're looking at the scenarios, one of the strongest form of market concentration It's cartels, cartels capabilities. And cartels are a group of firms that work together and jointly increase their profits. The cartel theory in oligopolistic markets, it indicates is that many firms or many sellers tend to work together in the industry as one main organization, as one main firm. A lot of the times you can actually look at drug cartels. There was a point in time that in the drug industry, cartels used to work together to maximize joint profits. They can either work individually, independently, or work together to maximize their joint returns, that is, an illegal product. Or one of the most commonly known cartels in history is the OPEC cartel, the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries. It was about 27 countries that joined together to produce crude oil, which is one similar product for everyone, and maximizing control the profits. So the cartel itself, it reduces output since the product is very similar. Think about oil, and they can have the ability to influence the price in an effort to maximize their joint profits. In the cartel theory, we actually can see that sometimes the cartel can cheat one another and not cooperate, and the profits decline. So the cartels can benefit from joint agreements, working together to maximize their profits, and the benefits could be quite significant. And the actual model looks like a monopoly model, where it's just highly profitable for one firm to control everything, and all of the other firms agree to each other, and it's highly beneficial. So it will be very similar. So the model. Notice how the monopoly model is kind of very similar. This is a cartel model when one organization consisting of many firms maximize combined profits. So here we have the quantity that the cartel, QC, quantity controlled by the cartel, it's restricted. One of the characteristics of a cartel is that it restricts output given the average total cost at point B. It sets the price, it controls the price on the consumer demand. Price cartel is greater than the average cost of production. The difference between the price cartel at point A on the demand curve minus the average cost of production at point B, cost of production to the cartel quantity, it will yield profits. And if the actual firm wanted to produce at a lower price, they can produce at a lower price, P of 1, where the average total cost is the lowest, and produce more output. So it behaves very similar to a profit maximizing monopoly. But in this case, it's a cartel. Because a monopoly is just one company maximizing profits, or one private firm. And a cartel, the main difference is that there are many firms working together to maximize their joint profits that produce a similar product, like crude oil. Crude oil is crude oil regardless if it's produced in the US, regardless if it's produced in Saudi Arabia, regardless if it's produced in Venezuela or Africa. It is crude oil. It's raw mineral. So it's similar products. Now, the price and output under the cartel can fluctuate. If there are mutual agreements, everybody gets along well. But there's potential abilities to have issues. The OPEC cartel was well known for disagreements between themselves or among themselves. There were disagreements, and there are still some disagreements in the oil industry. So there could be cartel issues. The organization itself can be highly time-consuming. It involves getting everyone to agree, everyone to be working together. It involves everyone to be on the same type of mentality and in the same type of cost and benefit analysis. So you have to form the cartel and get everyone to agree to form the cartel. You have to create a policy that everyone can abide to, and often that's difficult because not everybody wants to abide by the same rules. There's difficulty of entering the industry. Other firms may want to enter, but it's already controlled by certain firms. There could be possibility of cheating or someone cheating on the cartel. In often cases, countries limit cartel organizations, like the U.S. legislation actually prohibits cartel creation. So we can relate this to a lot of different industries, and one of them that could be related is the drug cartel. They are illegal. So in the U.S. legislation, you can actually it's illegal for drug cartels, and they are always cheating on each other, fighting with one another. There's other ones entering the industry to capture some profits, and forming everyone to agree and join together is very difficult. It used to be that they were one main cartel, but since there's the ability to fight with one another, not everybody agrees. There's always disputes that nobody agrees with the policies, so they could cheat. But you actually see that if a cartel organizes themselves well and everyone works together, profits are maximized. If there's cheating, if there's actually some disagreements, profits could only benefit some at the expense of the others, and so on. So when we're looking at analyzing oligopoly, we can analyze oligopoly through what is called game theory analysis. Game theory analysis was introduced in Princeton by a mathematician, and in analyzing the behavior of decision making and the decision making process of individuals and firms, and how to make optimal decisions through either strategic planning, through the consideration of interdependence, and also through analyzing the self-interest behavior of people and people that are fully aware of their interactive nature. So game theory is actually very interesting, and the models are very interesting as well. So we're looking to analyze the interdependence between multiple parties, between two people, two organizations, two individuals, two firms, two countries, and the model is very interesting, and we're going to do some examples of this. We can either behave as individuals, individually speaking. One company can behave on their own, the other company can behave on their own, or we can cooperate. We can cooperate together, or we cannot cooperate. This is a very interesting scenario. Self-interest behavior means that you don't cooperate with most people. The theory of game theory specifies that it's probably in the best interest of people to cooperate, even when people don't like to cooperate or would not like to cooperate. It's probably best to cooperate in some cases. So let's take a look. Game theory analyzes the dilemma the individuals often face in the act of cooperation, or in the act of working together, or maximizing profits, or working individually. And one of them is also analyzed in what is called the prisoner's dilemma game theory payoff matrix. The prisoner's dilemma game theory payoff matrix analyzes two individuals that may be interdependent, or their actions are interdependent, not independent, interdependent, which means that whatever they do together, their actions are going to affect one another. And it illustrates a case which individuals can behave rational by looking after themselves in their own self-interest and not care about the other person, or they could work together and potentially help both of the parties involved. So in the prisoner's dilemma, we see a great example of how most people or most individual firms would have the incentive to behave in a self-interest manner. And it's rationally okay to behave self-interest if you're looking after your own self. But when you have a party of interdependent behavior, it may be in the best interest to have a joint consideration. Because if you are interdependent with someone else, you may actually lead into an inefficient outcome. So the lesson that the game or that this example is providing is that you may want to do what is best for you. I'll do what is best for me. And if we both are inconsiderate of one another, we may end up in a situation that is worse, or is not the best for neither of both people or both of us. So in this game, we can actually see, or in this model, we can see that it is rationally okay for people to pursue their self-interest if they're looking after themselves. But if you have someone that is interdependent within you in your decision making, if you behave in what's best for you without considering the other person, and the other person behaves in I'll do what's best for me and you do what's best for you, then both people are moving away from each other, not helping each other out, and somehow they may end up in a situation that is not beneficial for both of them. Let's take a look. So suppose we have Leslie and Ken. Leslie and Ken are two individuals that engage in a criminal act or in a dishonest act. They commit a crime, there's evidence to implicate Leslie and Ken for a crime, and they get caught by the police. And they have the option to confess or not confess. So this is what is called the prisoner's dilemma when two people commit a crime. They find themselves in a dilemma. Go to prison or be released. So the premises are simple. We have 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1, they don't confess. Quadrant 2, we have some confession. Quadrant 3, and Quadrant 4. Quadrant 1 is going to specify if Ken doesn't confess, Leslie doesn't confess, if they both agree not to confess with each other, with one another. They agree together. We're interdependent. We both committed a crime. We're both responsible. We understand that we're interdependent, and we can put ourselves on the line if we implicate one another. So they agree not to confess between themselves. Not with the police, but between themselves. So if they don't confess, it's Quadrant 1. In Quadrant 2, we have Leslie, that she may be willing to confess, but we have Ken in the yellow area that it says, no, I'm not going to confess. So this is a mismatch. Quadrant 2 is a mismatch. One confesses and the other one doesn't. If Ken is the one that confesses and Leslie says, no, I'm going to stay quiet, I'm not going to say anything, then Ken confesses and Leslie does not, and there's a mismatch. And then the Quadrant 4 indicates, well, Leslie confesses that she did the crime and Ken confesses that he did the crime. Let's see how both of them are going to end up if they confess or not confess on the crime. Quadrant 1, Quadrant 2. If Leslie does not confess and Ken does not confess on the crime, there is enough evidence to implicate both of them on the crime, but they stay silent, they plead not guilty. Both of them get 5 years by not confessing. If Leslie believes that she needs to look after herself, 5 years is too much. If she stays quiet, she's going to get 5 years. She may be inclined to look after her own self-interest, her own well-being, and confess and implicate Ken. If Ken does not confess, it is only under the assumption that Ken does not confess. Ken does not confess. He's going to stay quiet, and Leslie confesses. She gets a 2-year deal because she's looking after herself, and Ken stays silent. He thinks that Leslie's not going to give him up, but she does. And she takes 2 years instead of 5, and Ken gets the maximum penalty of 20 years. This is if Leslie confesses and Ken does not. Quadrant 2. Quadrant 3, let's say, well, Ken is the one that is going to confess in this time. He gets 2 years, and Leslie decides to stay quiet because she really wants to protect Ken and doesn't really want to give him up. She doesn't confess. Leslie doesn't confess. Leslie is the one that gets 20 years. If both of them confess, because both of them are inclined to look after themselves, their well-being, again, the presumption here is that they are self-interest behavior. If Ken is looking for his self-interest, he's going to look for his 2-year deal. If Leslie is looking for her self-interest, she's going to look for her 2-year deal. If both of them confess, Leslie confesses, Ken confesses, both of them implicate one another on the crime, and there's now enough evidence by declaration that they can get both 15 years. That means they didn't cooperate with each other. They might have cooperated with the law, and they get 15 years each by implicating with each other here, and they end up a little bit worse off if Leslie says, I'm going to look what's best. If Leslie does what's best for her by attempting to get 2 years, she's going to get now 15, because Ken is going to look for his best interest by trying to get 2 years. He's going to get 15 because Leslie already gave him up and Ken already gave up Leslie. So both of them end up worse than if they would just cooperate with each other and agree from the beginning not to confess and get only 5. This is what is called Nash equilibria. Nash equilibria means that they reach a point of non-cooperation and everyone is looking after themselves and end up worse with 15 years instead of cooperating and get only 5. Very interesting model. This could be applied to social relationships, the interaction of individuals, cooperation in companies and business, and so on. So let's take a look at the prisoner's dilemma further. The prisoner's dilemma here is going to be a fine, a penalty. In quadrant 1, we have not confessing and not implicating on the crime. Quadrant 2, again, one confesses, the other one does not. Quadrant 3, Bob here confesses and Nathan does not. In quadrant green, both of them confess. In this case, they're going to pay a penalty. They're not going to go to prison, but they're going to pay a penalty or a fine for committing an act of violence or crime or something. So we have Nathan and Bob, who they're not willing to cooperate and they're not going to confess, but they're found in the crime scene and they need to pay a fine of $2,000. If they don't confess, they cooperate with each other, they end up only paying $2,000. If Nathan confesses and says that it was Bob's idea, Bob is going to be the one paying the majority of the fine, and Nathan, since he cooperated with the authorities, he's only going to pay $500. If Bob here is the one that confesses and says that it was actually Nathan, Nathan's going to be the one getting the full penalty of $5,000 and so on. If both of them confess from the very beginning and they look after their own self-interest, then both of them are fully guilty and both of them pay $3,000 each, which is a lot more than by not confessing. Very interesting case with a fine or going to prison. The cartel situation is when the firms need to work with each other, hold an agreement of cooperation and working together, or working independently. So we can apply the prisoner's dilemma to the cartel profit maximizing behavior. Within this payoff matrix, this is referred to as the payoff matrix because it shows the payoffs for each individual firm. We have firm number 1 or firm A and firm B. If they choose to cooperate, I often refer to as quadrant 1 the cooperation point. If they choose to cooperate to hold an agreement to maximize profits, both firm A and firm B are going to maximize profits at $50,000 each. If firm B and firm A have a disagreement and firm A chooses to break the agreement and not cooperate, firm A is going to make $100,000. They have the incentive to make $100,000. And firm B is going to end up worse and he's going to only make $5,000 because firm A took the majority of it. This is when quadrant 2 is when one firm does not cooperate and the other one does. The firm that cheats or does not cooperate is the one that is going to take more because it's at the expense of the other. Firm B, if it's the one that is not cooperating and breaks the agreement, firm B is going to take home $100,000 at the expense of firm A, who chose to cooperate. They're going to end up worse. If both of the firms do not cooperate and break the agreements, they're only taking home $10,000. So firms have the ability to cooperate or not cooperate. If they don't cooperate, they end up worse with lower profits. If they cooperate, they end up better with higher profits. It really depends what product they're producing. In this case, if they have an interdependent related product that is similar, it is probably the best idea and the best interest to cooperate to maximize joint profits and get along well. If you don't cooperate, your profits decline in the market. And we can apply this further to, for example, the arms race in the world during the Cold War era. The U.S. and the Soviet Union engaged in an arms race, and basically, the U.S. and the Soviet Union have a history of not getting along even today, which is quite detrimental because there's a lot of weapons that could destroy the world 20 times. But that's a different story. So the U.S. and the Soviet Union enter into this race of building bombs. You can actually make up. You want to protect your country against the other one, let's build it first before they do, and vice versa. Anyways, there's a lot of bombs in the world. And they can either cooperate or not cooperate with each other. So it was what is called the arms race. The arms race. If they cooperate with each other, the agreement here is that both of them will end up better off. This is not the number of bombs, by the way. This is just the benefit for both parties. If the United States and the Soviet Union abide to the agreement to hold on the to stop the arms race and stop building nuclear weapons, stop building weapons of mass destruction, and so on. Both countries abide to that agreement, and they actually kind of agreed to not deploy any more nuclear blasts in the world because they probably realize that it's not good for our health or for the citizens. But they still build thousands of weapons anyways. So when we're looking at the Soviet Union, both countries are better off with a peaceful treaty. 10 out of 10. Yes, you guys agree? Great. But we know the history of the modern day Russia, modern day the different areas that were formerly part of the Soviet Union may not always agree with the United States. If the United States agrees, then the United States end up worse off because the Soviet Union might benefit at the expense of the US. And if the United States does not hold up and break the agreement, the United States might end up better at the expense of the Soviet Union. If both countries do not cooperate and break the agreement, Soviet Union breaks the agreement, the United States breaks the agreement, then both countries are going to end up worse off than if they had 10 out of 10 in terms of agreement conditions, and they continue their ongoing disputes, even as of today, modern day. So we're in the green box. They get along, they don't get along. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they don't. We're probably here in the green box, where they have shaky relationships. Now, when we're looking at the situation of what can firms do? They can cooperate, not cooperate, maximize profits, maximize joint profit, consider their interdependence, consider their mutual dependence, and so on. They can also engage, if they don't want to engage in all of those ongoing previous disputes, they can engage in what is called non-price competition. And non-price competition is the creation of brands, creating a different product, a different good that will distinguish everything from the other firm, and consumers will be attracted to that product by the experience that it provides and the branding mechanism, because you have it as a value. So this is referred to as a non-price competition, that is mainly an experience, the technology, the features, the satisfaction that it helps you as a consumer, that it provides you as a consumer, and all of the other features that help you convey that the product is of good quality. For example, we have various brands that people automatically recognize of being good versus some that may not be as good because of the branding and the logo. So logo, brand creation, celebrity endorsements, experience capability, different type of non-price competition can be engaged in product differentiation. Product differentiation is a source of non-price competition. You differentiate the product to make it better than someone else's product. And the greater the brand recognition, the greater the sales, the greater the value, the greater the transactions, the greater the consumption, the greater the profit, as long as the brand is highly recognizable. Thank you, everyone, for joining me this afternoon. If you have any questions, please contact me via email. I hope you enjoyed this session.